Hey, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us for the first in Worldskill UK's summer series of webinars, focusing on competition craft with myself, Greg and Steph as well. The focus for us on this at first side of things is going to be planning for success. So if everyone's sorted, we'll get going.
Okay, so today we're talking about how we structure your training program. Right now, in the current situation, you're in the perfect place to spend some time thinking about where you need to be. So we're going to start with goal setting. So we're going to start with talking about how to structure the goals and structure a training plan for yourself. So what I want you to do first of all, before we get into the details of goal setting, I want you to write down, so I want you to stop the video, I want you to write down what is your goal, what is your main goal for being involved with Worldskills. Just write it down on a piece of paper beside you and keep that beside you, and we'll come back to that in different times. So when we talk about goal setting, it tends to be one of these psychological strategies that is used, but it tends to be used quite poorly. There are a number of different pitfalls that happen with goal setting, and it's hard not to fall into those traps. Goal setting is one of the most successful psychological strategies used to enhance personal growth and performance. In the sports psychology world, almost 80% of athletes use goal setting, and when it is effectively set up, it enhances performance in 80% of cases. So it's a useful skill to have. When I've approached athletes before, and when I've worked with athletes to develop their goal setting, it tends to be something that athletes go, yeah, no, it's already done. My coach has done that for me. But it's a skill that you have to be involved in. So you may have done some goal setting at school, or you may have done it in your training plans already or at university. But what we're going to really focus on is how you're going to set your goal setting up, because today, the day we're recording the webinar, is almost exactly 8 months from Euroskills. It's 16 months from Shanghai, so it gives us enough time to really think about where are we, where do we want to be, and how are we going to get there. Next slide, please. So with that, what I want you to think about, and I want you just to write down a couple of lines or an answer. I want you to think in terms of goals. Why is it so difficult to get a taxi when it's pouring? When it's wet and miserable outside, why is it so difficult to get a taxi? And I'll give you a clue. It's actually got nothing to do with the demand going up in terms of the goals. So I want you to think about, why is it so difficult? Write down a line, and we'll come back to that halfway through. All right, next slide, please. So when we're talking about goal setting, I've already said how effective it is, and we know it's useful, and there are numerous motivational statements out there that talk about how to develop your ability to set a goal, and how if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. But it's about developing a plan that allows you to really focus and direct your attention. So there are a range of different benefits. When you're setting up a plan, it allows you to understand exactly where you are in terms of the technical skill. It allows you to understand what you need to do, or it makes you think about what you need to do in terms of developing your skill to be at the international standard. It also allows you to have a bit more of a sense of control. When coaches or training managers write a training plan for you, that's brilliant, but you need to be a part of developing your own training plan. So whether that's taking on a different aspect in terms of other technical skills you need to develop, or tactical skills, other strategies you want to enhance, goal setting should allow you to feel in control of your goals. And if you put yourself in a position where it's, you know, when social distancing isn't such a problem, and maybe your friends are going out for the night and you have training to do, it tends to make you focus a bit more, because you know these specific goals are set, and you know when you're aiming to achieve them and when they're measurable and how specific they are, it tends to help you make training or encourage training to be not mundane, because it gives you a focus on training. One of the other benefits is that it helps with performance anxiety. So if you're in a position where you have specific goals set out for a task, it tends to focus your attention on these little specific goals as opposed to thinking about the whole environment. So you focus on the specific goal and your attention gets drawn into that, as opposed to your attention being drawn to the, I want to win a medal, I want to do really well, I want to beat everybody else. When you're focused on specific sections, it tends to enhance your ability to manage any anxiety, and it helps to relate to expectations as well. Greg?
Cool, thanks, Steph. Sort of linked in with a lot of those points that Steph mentioned. Steph's very much looking at this from the psychological aspect, and goal setting's like always seen as a real psychological aspect of how we improve performance. But there's also a lot of physiological responses that we have to goal setting as well. So most of you might be aware, you know, that sense of elation. So you've come through nationals, you've obviously all performed particularly well, or you know, when you do a task goes particularly well, that little rush you get, that good feeling you get, that's because your body is responding to your success and it's releasing dopamine. It's making you feel good about how things are going. And that is like an ancient evolutionary response that we've had over time. And it used to be about keeping us alive. It's the same reason most of us like eating. You like eating, you get a hit of dopamine because it's good for us. Same goes with when you set your goals. And what we can do is we can set goals. And if we set goals that are not just these big far away things, but a little bit closer to us, we can use those to maintain our motivation. That every time we achieve a little bit of our goal, or we achieve the task that we set out to do, you get this little hit of dopamine that's released into your system. And that spurs you on to the next element that you're going to do. I bring it back to this evolutionary response. It used to be, I'd see in the distance, there's a tree, it's got food on it, I need to get to that tree. And if I gave up just because it was far away, I'd die. Species would die out. Instead, it's, I get a little bit closer, the tree gets a little bit bigger, I know I'm closer to getting my food, I get this little injection of dopamine. We don't need to worry about that anymore. You're no longer out there scavenging for food. You can go to the supermarket. You've got to queue outside for a little bit in the state that we're in, but you get in there eventually, as long as you stay 2 meters away from everyone else, you're fine, everything's great. But what we need to do is we need to use goals to keep us on track. And by setting these goals and then achieving those goals, we can build up towards getting that dopamine release. And the more complex the task, the bigger the challenge we set ourselves, the bigger the dopamine release is. So if we use these little elements that build up, hopefully you'll get that ultimate dopamine release of Shanghai, podium, you're on the top of it with a gold medal. Back to you, Steph.
Thank you. Okay, next slide, please, Hannah. So we know that it's going to be beneficial for your performance. You know that if you can set yourself a realistic, challenging, effective goal setting program and training plan, we know that it will enhance your performance. But it's really hard to do that. So how do we start to do that? Well, your first steps for planning need to be based on what feedback that you have just now. So in terms of the initial assessment, you need to write down what are your strengths. So in terms of technical skills, tactical skills, strategies, you might, in stonemasonry, for example, you might understand geometry and you might feel that that's a real strength of yours in terms of how you're putting together the program. In BIM, it might be about your project and modeling your project. But you need to know just now, where are you? And ideally, you need some feedback for that. So you need to go to your training manager. You need to make sure you're aware of the back to basics feedback, the feedback from the nationals, and you need to know what your strengths are. So, and you also then need to think about, well, what areas do I need to work on? So if you are weak in time management, then how are you going to get better at that? That needs to be one of your skills, like one of the areas that you're going to develop. You also need to think about what you need to prioritize, because some skills, there'll be specific areas where that's where you gain most points. So do you need to really focus on these specific areas? What's an area that you really like training? But if that's not a priority area, then that may be nice to train, but you need to think about what are your priorities in terms of skill development, tactical development, perhaps it's psychological and mindset development. But that's the area, so you need to know where you're at, you need to know what is important, and then we need to think about how we're going to structure the timing, because it's not just one huge program that you need to plan for that's just getting better all the way throughout. You need to think about how to periodise your program, because as we said, we've got squad selection events in February and May, Euroskills in 8 months, and Shanghai in 16 months. So how are you going to structure your training program to fit into these specific elements? So next slide, please.
Okay, so when we're talking about this concept of periodization of training, what we're thinking about is exactly what Steph just said. It's breaking up this long-term process we've now got into manageable chunks. Think about an athlete, any athlete out there. They are not training every single thing in every single training session. Hopefully you're not trying to do that as well. I would hope that there's nobody out there so far who's sat down and tried to do a 4-day training session that completely replicates exactly what you do at competition, because we're not going to get the most out of your skill development from that. We might get up to that point later in our training session, but right now we need to break down our training and we need to use our goal setting to help us structure that. And we've got to be critically honest with ourselves. We've got to use all those sources of feedback, and from that we can start to build what we need to do. So on the slide, you'll see a couple of little bit of examples of something called periodization. We can break our training into different cycles. We can have a macro cycle, and our macro cycle is our end goal, is our big shiny goal of our goal of having a gold medal at Shanghai. That's our macro cycle. It's from day one right now to that point. We then need to break that down into what we call mesocycles, and each mesocycle has a specific focus. So if you look at the graph picture, you'll see that there's something called general preparation, specific preparation, competition, and then transition, which we have to think about after the competition. But later on in this series of webinars, we'll talk a little bit more about what that involves. And that's a mesocycle. Underneath each mesocycle, we'll have a microcycle. And a microcycle might be 1 week, 2 weeks. And that'll be, okay, in this period of time now, this microcycle, I'm going to focus on this particular element of my skill to develop it. And then within my microcycle, I've got my individual training sessions. So what is the focus of this training session? Does this training session link to my next training session? Having a scattergun approach where I just pick a bit of my skill that I want to work on each day is not going to allow for that consistent development. So what we need to think about is, okay, how can we base each level of our training sessions so they build into these cycles and move forward? There's a little message on there that's really key. You don't need to be world class right now. You don't need to be world class in 2 months' time. You need to be world class at key points throughout your cycle. Those might be your selection event. It might be at Euros. It's definitely at Worlds. So we need to be making sure we peak at the right times. And we can structure our training to allow us to peak in certain ways. And all of that comes back to our goals. So we need to think about what are the goals of my sessions, my microcycles, my mesocycles, my macrocycles, to make sure that I'm on an upward trajectory. We've had competitors who've won gold at Euroskills in the past, who have not gone on to represent WorldSkills UK at world international level. Imagine that. I've gone from gold, but somebody else is on the trajectory to actually overtake me and be in the best position to be the person that we take when we go to international competition. The same goes with our people who have done, and they will hopefully tell you this, absolutely tanked it at Euros. They got it all wrong at Euros. They came second last out of all the countries involved. However, they stuck with it. They went back to their training cycles. They've set themselves some goals. And these guys ended up finishing just outside the medals and getting a medallion of excellence out in Kazan. So it's all about how we structure our training to hit the peak at the right time. And that's where these goals come into it. What is the goal I'm working towards right now? Is it to be world class? Brilliant, fantastic. But we'll come on to how realistic is that to do that right now. So you can just click onto the next slide for me, Hannah. I'm conscious that throughout all of this, me and Steph, we constantly give you examples based on sport. And I know for not all of you, sport is something that you necessarily relate to. So we'll also throw it out there. Think of it like a cake, okay? Your macro is that entire cake. If you were to sit down and eat that entire cake right now, how hard would that be? So what you might do is break it down into a measure of having each slice of cake. That's far more manageable to think about. Well, okay, if I eat all of these slices, I know I can eat that cake. And then it might be like, I don't like the actual sponge, but I like the filling. And those are my micros. So how can I start with smaller amounts that build into each other as we go? And just have that in the back of your mind as you're thinking about things. Carl will hate it because cake, not healthy. But, it's one of those things. He'll deal with it. But you need to have cake in the back of your mind when you're thinking about structuring your programs. And just think about what is it you want to get from it and how am I going to build towards that. Okay, next slide, please, Sam.
So what Greg has just been saying about how to tie in the different cycles of your training ties into how you're going to set your goal. So the first thing you need to do is set a long-term goal. I mean, this can be a dream goal, as long as it is something that at some point can be realistic. So you need to set your dream goal. This might be, as some of you may have said, a gold medal in Shanghai. When you're setting that, one of the problems with goal setting tends to be that we set this goal and we say, okay, that's what I'm aiming for, but there's no real structure and way how to do that. So what we're aiming for is for you to try to think, okay, set my long-term goal, set a date, set how measurable it is, and then you can come back and start thinking about, well, how do I need to build that up? It's not just about having one long-term goal and then a couple of medium terms, so maybe Euroskills or squad selection. We need to take it right back to where we're at just now. You know where you're at in terms of where your skills are and where your challenges lie. Then we need to think, well, how do we going to build that into a program in terms of weekly or monthly goals? Because part of goal setting is about what kind of stepping stones and where are the ladders to build up to this long-term or dream goal that you might have. You also need to set within that, the goals need to be for both competition and for each training session. So if you've got a series of training sessions over a week, what are the goals of these? Because if they're kind of aimless and you're just doing it because your training manager has said, oh, you need to do this week, why are you doing that? Because when it's hard and when you don't want to do that training, you need to know why you're there. And I think if you remember back to that first boot camp that we had together, we talked about, oh, why are you here? So that ties into goal setting. Why you're here will relate to your long-term goal, and then that ties into the smaller steps in terms of the training goals that you need. One mistake as well in terms of goal setting is only setting technical goals. What we need is we need goals that relate to the whole person, because it's the whole person that goes on to achieve success. It's not just the technique. You may have the best technique in the world for one specific part of your skill, but if you cannot manage time, if your nutrition is not in place so that you're exhausted and you start to make mistakes, or your tactics, you get kind of psyched out by some of the other competitors who you think are performing well, then these tend to affect how that you will attain that overall goal. And one other part of how we set goals relates to the type of goals that we set. Now, Hannah, if you could go to the next slide for me, please.
Just before we do that, Steph, if I can jump on one bit there. So
Sure.
Steph talked a little bit there about goals that are associated with you as an individual as well as your skill. And I think that's massively important to understand. If you look at some of the highest performing teams out there in the sports world, so let's take, for example, the All Blacks in rugby and the Australian cricket team, they both have the same mantra. So the All Blacks, it is as simple as good people make great All Blacks. They invest, this is one of the top performing teams in the world, they invest as much time in their technical skill and develop as they do is in developing the person, because they firmly believe that good people make great All Blacks. The Australian cricket team have exactly the same process, and they'll spend as much time developing that themselves to be the best that they can be as a rounded person in addition to their technical skill. So there's some really strong things we can learn there.
Thank you. Okay, so if you go to the next, thank you. So when we're setting our goals, we need to think about the types of goals because some are more helpful to us than others. There are three different types of goals. We have outcome goals, and these tend to be goals that are surrounded by it doesn't really matter about our score, etc. But it can be something like I want to win a gold at World Skills. Some of the problems though with these outcome goals is that it focuses on the winning part, but you can't control how somebody else performs. And sometimes when somebody else is performing well, maybe on day 2 of World Skills, because your goal is focused on winning, that tends to put you off because you might get distracted because someone else is performing well, which you didn't think would be performing well. So you tend to be more focused on others because the goal is about beating other people. When we look at performance types of goals, that tends to be about achieving a specific standard. So it's maybe about you getting your personal best. It's about it being irrespective of any other competitors. So regardless of what someone else is performing, it would tend to be about you've set yourself a specific goal about your performance that you're aiming for. This tends to be more beneficial than outcome goals, but process and mastery goals tend to be the most effective type of goals, because a process goal is about something specific in terms of how you perform the task that allows you to perform well. So the example we've said is I want to produce an accurate template within 0.2 mils within the time frame. So this type of goal tends to make you focus more on your performance rather than thinking about beating other people or getting distracted by other people's performance. Now we have a video that I would like you to watch. It's Usain Bolt in the 2008 Beijing Olympics, and he's breaks the world record for the 100-meter sprint. So I'd like you to watch that, and I want you to think, what type of goal do you think he has set himself for this task? So if you stop the video and watch that clip, that would be great. And that's on the World Skills webpage. Okay, so after watching the Usain Bolt video, you can see that he goes real hard for the first maybe 60 or 70 meters. Once he realizes that he is going to win, and once he realizes that he's quite far ahead of all the others, he changes his technique. He kind of starts to showboat and show off. And if you look at this picture on the slide, he's not in perfect technique there. He's slowing down at that point. Now, he does win a world record, but if he hadn't stopped and showboated and realised that how far ahead he was of everybody else, can you imagine what kind of performance he would have produced? Because he slows down from about 65, 70 metres. So he's got 30 metres of slowing. So his goal is definitely, it might be a kind of outcome-based goal or performance goal. Perhaps he wanted to run a PB, but it was definitely the outcome in this specific one here was about, I want to win. I want to beat everybody else. And because he is beating everyone else, he slows down and limits his own performance. So that's some of the dangers of these kind of outcome goals, whereas performance and process is kind of mastering a task goal. These tend to provide a lot more motivation, and it doesn't limit you at all. Okay, if you go to the next slide for me. So that ties into why it's so difficult to get a taxi when it's raining. Probably most people will have talked about, well, the demand for taxis go up. So when it's wet, people want to get taxis rather than have to walk. But some really interesting research has come out over the last couple of years in terms of the goals that taxi drivers have set. And the goals that taxi drivers have set relate more to outcome. So their aim for their shift is to work to make a specific amount of money. So because the demand has gone up, the taxi drivers earn that money in a much shorter period of time. So once they've earned that certain amount of money, then they stop, shift early, and go home. So actually the supply goes down too, because the taxi drivers have set a limiting goal of, well, that's as much money as I need to earn tonight. I've earned that money early, so I go home. So although the demand is up, the supply drops down because of the type of goal. Greg, do you want to comment?
No, I think that's fine. There's a really good link between that, and if people are looking for little books and things to read at the same time, that study's talked about in quite a funny way in a book called The Good Psychopath's Guide to Success, which is quite key on mindset, about how to choose a particular type of mindset and tap into your inner psychopath. So if you're looking for something to read, that's quite worthwhile doing.
All right, thank you. If you move on to the next slide, please. Okay, you have probably heard of this in the goal setting literature. This is really a common kind of phrase that's set out. When you're setting your goals, it's really important that you use this type of approach. It tends to structure your goal setting training program much more clearly. In terms of specific, it has to be exactly what you are going to achieve. The more specific your goal can be, the better. It tends to hold the individual accountable to that specific goal. So when you're setting yourself some technical goals, they have to be specific. They also have to be measurable, because if it's not measurable, it's hard to say, when it's achieved. So if I say, oh yeah, I'm going to be able to do this skill in the next few weeks, well, how do we actually know when you've achieved? Like, is it measurable to be achieved or not? Action oriented is also something you need to consider, because your training managers will have probably organised some kind of time frame and training plan for you. But we know in the research with goal setting, if you are actively involved in setting some goals, then you are much more likely to achieve them. So this is the time to go back to your training manager while we're in this situation in isolation. This is the time to go back to your TM to say, can you explain about this skill? Why do I need to develop this skill? How am I going to develop it? Set up this action-oriented plan. Goals also need to be realistic, and there's absolutely no sense in setting a goal that is not realistic. It tends to promote that kind of loss of self-confidence and feeling of failure if it's not realistic. But it does need to be challenging. And probably your training manager will be able to help you with that in terms of technical skills, but you will be able to understand where you're at in terms of psychological ability and nutrition. So it has to be realistic, but challenging goals tend to be much more effective in enhancing performance than goals that are just, oh yeah, I can do that, no problem, or I'm never going to be able to do that. Time frames is important. You need to set for each goal specific time frames that you add in. So this will be done in 2 weeks, or I'll have this degree of accuracy in 4 weeks because I've been training 3 times a week for 20 minutes every week on this type of accuracy. They also need to be self-determined. It has to be meaningful, this means. It means you're taking ownership for it, and it has to be about being actively involved and making sure that they're your goals as well. Now, very probably you'll have goals that don't tie in to world skills. They might be goals around building your confidence or feeling able to ask a question. So these goals have to tie into the whole person, as we talked about at the beginning. All right, next slide, please. So this is just a little task for you to think about. Am I SMART goal? So these goals, I want you to think, is this a specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, time-bound, self-determined goal to finish a marathon in under 2 hours, like Greg?
Eliot Kipchoge.
Like Eliot Kipchoge. Thank you. Okay, Hannah. So this one is specific. We know exactly what that person wants to do. It is measurable. It's probably not action onto a realistic, and it's not time frame, because when do they want to set a goal? When do they want to do that by? How? And there's no way of saying, well, what training have they done to get towards that goal? Okay, next one, please. So practice setting project coordinates for BIM for 30 minutes 4 times a week. Is this SMART? Is that specific? Is it measurable? Is it actioned? Is it realistic in time frame? This is the type of goal that you need to be aiming for. Okay, next one, please. Scored higher than other squad members at squad selection. So we need to think again, well, how specific is that? That's also an outcome goal, which is not ideal. There's no action prescribed. There's no steps on how you're actually going to progress to through each of the phases to beat all the other squad members at squad selection. Hannah, thank you. So this is measurable because you've got an outcome to it. It may be realistic. You've got a time frame to it, but clearly not the full identification of a goal. Okay, next one, please. Do some technical training a few times a week. This tends to be one that we might use. So again, it's not specific, not measurable, although it is actioned, possibly realistic in time frame. Okay, last one. Finish reading the World Skills Standards before July, which I hope you all get to, but is that a SMART goal? Well, it's not particularly self-determined goal, but also there's no kind of action frame in that. How are you going to do that? How many days a week are you going to set aside to actually complete that? How many times do you need to go over it till you fully comprehend it? All right, thank you. Next slide, please. Great.
Okay, so when we're setting goals, most of you would have been used to doing this, and you probably have come across the SMART sort of an acronym before, and you're probably thinking, I know all about this. But here are a couple of the sort of things that we often see as coaches and trainers, where some of the sort of potential pitfalls that we often see. So too many goals too soon. Hopefully you're massively inspired by this webinar and you're sitting there now and you're thinking, right, this is it, I'm going to nail it. And you're going to write yourself a goal for every single day this week that's going to tie into next week and onwards and onwards. Too many goals, we end up in a position where we can't see the wood for the trees and we can't tell what's going on. So what we need to do is we need to measure these goals that we do. We actually need to allow ourselves the time to achieve them. So scale it back a little bit, keep that enthusiasm, but just think a little bit about what we're doing. Next one's goal reevaluation. Goals only work if we actually think about what we're doing with them and we come back and tick them off. Okay, did I achieve that? Yes, no, okay, yes, why? What did I use? Can I use that moving forward to help me achieve my next goal? Did I not achieve it? It's easy to go, yeah, I didn't achieve it. It was too hard. Why was it too hard? What was it? You know, break down that SMART and acronym. What part was missing that made that goal not something I could achieve? Linked into that, we've got failing to modify unrealistic goals. So hopefully we all want to get that goal. That's why we're here. You know, we want to compete. We want to put ourselves out there. But in that process, as we build up to it, one of the most crippling things you can see with any athlete or anyone in a competitive situation is where they're setting the bar so high, they never reach that bar. Now they push themselves to reach it, but you can burn yourself out and you can lose that motivation and you can lose the joy of why you're doing it. So we've got to think about what it is that we're doing. What can I modify my goal? Because think back to that dopamine release. If I'm constantly faced with failure, it becomes really hard to stay engaged and to carry on with it. So can I modify my goals to give me that hit of dopamine to drive me on to the next one? Next, we've got setting do your best goals. It's great. Get a PB. That's great. But if I say I'm going to go and give it my best, that's brilliant. But where's the specifics? What is it that you're going to do that's going to make it your best? So there's nothing really wrong with it, but it's just something we need to consider is how can we really tailor that do your best to make sure we're getting the most out of it. And the final one there is about setting avoidance goals. It can be, I'm going to not do this. I won't do this. A lot of research out there shows that when we frame something in the negative, it's nowhere near as powerful, or it doesn't hold us as accountable as if we're setting it in the positive. I'm going to do this. I'm going to train for 3 times a week. Not, I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z. One other point from this that we need to think about as well, linking into these dopamine elements, is when we're setting our goals, we need to think about how we're visualizing them, how we're seeing them, how we're engaging with our goals. That's one of the big pitfalls that we see, is people who don't engage with the goals that you set. And part of what we need to think about there is my goal tangible? Is it reachable? As a species, we're skeptical. We don't tend to believe something until we've seen it. So think about, you're lying in bed and you hear a bang downstairs, and you know it's probably nothing. But how often is it until you have to get out of bed and go and have a look? You know, or somebody comes to you and says, ran a marathon in 2 hours, 10 minutes. Well, okay, show me on Strava. You know, we don't believe it until we've seen it in some way. You'll have come across this at some point. And the same thing goes with our goals. So what I would encourage you to do is make sure that you write your goals down and come back to them as a method of holding yourself accountable, or create them in a visualized way. So Steph touched on visualization, and there'll be some more stuff on visualization a little bit later on in the series. But when you're setting that goal, imagine to yourself and build a real crystal clear picture in your mind of what that's going to be. So what does completing that goal actually look like? What does it feel like? If you can hold that image, your buy-in to your goal will be far more advanced. Do you want to go on to the next slide, Hannah?
Can I just jump in here? Can I jump in? With respect to going back to the beginning when we started, and I asked you to write down your goal around being at World Skills, it'd be useful now for you to come back and have a look at, well, is that a SMART goal? Is it a performance, an outcome, a process goal? Does it actually tie into any of the pitfalls that we have seen with goal setting? Because it's really easy to do that. So I'd really like you to come back and think about what you have already written down for your goal, and then think about how you might want to adapt that and change that to make that a more effective goal, to make that is your long-term or your dream starting point goal. So where you're going to end up. Thanks.
Cool. We've only got a couple more slides to go. We're nearly done. All we're going to do is we're going to put these up so you can pause on them when you watch the video and use them to reflect back on. But here's just an example from sport about how you would build a successful goal. So what I want you to look at in terms of this slide is the amount of detail that goes into it. So what is the development area? What specifically about that development area am I going to do? What are my actions? How do I measure it? How do I know I've succeeded in that goal? What's my target to complete that? So it might help you to structure your goals in something similar to this to look forward. If you just click onto the next slide for us, Hannah. And from this one, it's again another format of how we can lay out our goals. So we can start to think about what it is we're going to do. And what's really important is to track these goals. We spoke about not coming back and checking in with them. If you keep a log of your goals, so you keep it somewhere where you can record it and you can come back to it and you can comment on what went well, what didn't go well. I would hope a lot of you are keeping some form of training diary anyway. So you're reflecting on, okay, that was a really good session. What was it around that session that helped me? What did I eat the night before? How much sleep had I got? We can do the same with our goals. What were the factors that built towards that being a successful goal? So again, have a look at this screen. There's some little questions on there that you might want to look at. Okay, do you want to go on to the next slide, Hannah? Cool. So we're going to wrap up there. Steph wants to jump in with any of the little bits, but we're just going to say a massive thank you for engaging with it and sticking out to the end and watching this with us. If you've got any questions, make sure you speak to your training managers, you speak to the performance and wellbeing team. Myself and Steph are available as well. So I just want to say massive thank you, all the best, and stay safe to everyone.
And just a little bit about next week. So the following week after this webinar, you'll be involved in a squad, a skill cluster group huddle that will be based on some of the information developed in this webinar. So make sure that when you turn up for this skill group, the cluster huddle, you have an idea about goals, what your goals might be, and how you might think about planning the task. If you have also got any questions about goal setting, periodization, then bring that up to your squad huddle as well. But thank you so much for sticking it out to the end. If you do have questions, please let us know. Thank you very much for your time.